Hello, everybody, and welcome to GSBN. This is my first episode on this channel. I'm going to be doing a lot of sports reviewing and talk. I'm probably going to focus more on football and basketball. But today I wanted to start with talking about NFL division review and my predictions. This is going to be an 8-video series where I talk about each NFL division, give a review of the offseason so far, and try to make a prediction for the year. A couple of interesting things have happened, and the over-looming COVID-19 virus could make the season interesting. But I decided I'm going to start off with the NFC North. Then I'm going to go east-west, or east-southwest, northeast-southwest, go around the compass, and do every single division. So I'm starting with the NFC North. For the division, this is the division, of course, with the Vikings, the Packers, the Lions, and the Bears. Last year, Packers won the division, 13-3, went to the NFC Championship game. Vikings were also in the playoffs, but made a relatively quick exit. Bears and Lions both missed the playoffs. Lions didn't have a very good year. Bears could have had better years, especially a couple of years back. So when I was making my prediction, I looked at the schedules and their incoming free agents and all other considered, returning injuries, stuff like that. And when I thought about it, I realized that I feel like the best team in this division for the 2020 season is the Minnesota Vikings. I feel like the Minnesota Vikings are the best team in the NFC North right now. I feel like the Packers are a good team, but not a great team. And I don't feel like the Lions or the Bears have a good enough roster to challenge the Vikings, personally. So for my division review, going over this division, I predict that the Vikings will make the playoffs, win the NFC North, and I also predicted that the Packers and the Lions would also make the playoffs, because remember, there is a new playoff format where there's 3 wildcard teams. So I predict that the Vikings will go 12-5, the Packers and the Lions will both go 9-8, and that the Bears will go 6-11. Let me move on to talking about specifically why I have this prediction. First off, with the Vikings. The Vikings had an extremely deep draft. They drafted more players, I believe, than any other team in the league, which is going to set you up good because you have more disposable players, sure, and also more talent to pull from. They picked up Justin Jefferson, wide receiver from LSU, who's arguably, or not even arguably, Joe Burrow's favorite target last year, in their miraculous run through the national championship game into a championship for that school. And Jeff Gladney from TCU, who's a solid cornerback. And then I wanted to also make note of some of the talent they were still able to get in later rounds, actually. Two that stuck out to me were Josh Metellus from Michigan, cornerback, and Kenny Willekes, however we pronounce that name, defensive end from Michigan State. I feel like this is low risk, super high reward talent. I feel like Willekes specifically is very, very motivated and a really good leader. An absolute steal in the 7th round. He's a guy I expected that would go in around the 5th round. And Josh Metellus, I feel like, also has a lot of upside. Just a really good depth corner, I felt like. So I thought the Vikings drafted extremely well. A lot of projections actually had them as the number 1 draft in the league, talent-wise. People felt like the Vikings drafted just as good, if not better, than everybody else. So not only was their draft really good, but they have a ton of talent on the roster, offense and defense. Kirk Cousins is a solid quarterback. He may not be like elite, but Kirk Cousins is a solid quarterback, and you can definitely win games with Kirk Cousins. They still have Adam Thielen. They traded away Stephon Diggs, but Justin Jefferson will replace him, and I think that's perfectly fine because it takes up less cap space anyway. The defense still has a ton of talent. That's what they've been known for in recent years. Plus, Dalvin Cook, top 5 running back in the league, arguably. I'd say he's around the 5 mark. I think this team has a ton of potential. I don't know if I would put them. I don't think they're like Super Bowl favorites, but I would put them in like the Super Bowl contenders. Like, definitely expect this team to make the playoffs and make a run at the Super Bowl. I don't know if they can quite get there, but they are going to be like expect them to be about at that level. Some teams they play this year of note, they do play AFC South opponents. And NFC South opponents. So that means they're going to be running in teams like the revamped Buccaneers and the Saints, as well as the recharged Titans that somehow popped up in the playoffs last year. So expect there'll definitely be some tough teams in their schedule. They also play a second place schedule, so they're going to be playing teams like the Seahawks. So definitely plenty of losable games. But overall, this team has plenty of talent and has all of the talent needed to make a run towards the Super Bowl. The next team, the Green Bay Packers, like I mentioned earlier, coming off of a great 13-3 record last year. Unfortunately, that ended with them getting absolutely thrashed in the NFC Championship game. And I always felt when watching the Green Bay Packers last year that they kind of felt like fraudulent, like they didn't belong in any of the games they were in, but they kept like winning, despite this. I don't know if I've ever watched an NFC Championship game and beforehand known what the result was going to be so confidently as I did when they played the 49ers. In fact, I was pretty confident that the Packers would lose their first playoff game, but they managed to pull it out. I was actually quite impressed by that because I thought there was no way. The team basically looked extremely fraudulent to me. The draft that the Packers had was definitely questionable, and in direct contrast with the draft that the Vikings had, it was rated basically the worst draft out of every single person. Basically gave the Packers the worst draft out of everybody in the NFL. So a direct contrast from the Vikings. The Jordan Love pick was interesting. Definitely taking the same approach they took with Favre. Drafting a replacement early and then hoping you have a rotation of elite talent coming in. And I kind of do understand going with that if you're thinking about it that way from the Packers because it worked so well with Aaron Rodgers. However, I don't think you need to do it this early anymore. The Chiefs proved with the Mahomes pick that you don't need 4 years to develop a quarterback talent before you use them. You can do it in 1 or 2. So I feel like, and I think most people will agree with me here, that there were few Packers fans that were pleased with the choice of taking Jordan Love. But I think Jordan Love is pretty good. I think he had the most bust potential out of any of the first round mocked quarterbacks, but I think Green Bay is a good enough organization that he'll probably be fine. Obviously, you won't see the field for a while, and the Packers had some glaring holes that were not covered by the draft. Also, if the rumors are true that Matt LaFleur and the management over in Green Bay chose Love as to get leverage on Rodgers, then that is extremely worrying because if that relationship falls apart, Green Bay is going to crumble. Aaron Rodgers is really the maestro, the alpha dog over in Green Bay, and I'd be extremely worried if that were to fall apart. Rodgers is definitely running out of elite years. I would still definitely consider him elite. He's one of the best quarterbacks in the league. Even if he didn't have like an amazing year last year, it was still a pretty good year. even by Aaron Rodgers standards. But in the second round, after their Jordan Love pick, the Green Bay Packers went with A.J. Dillon, which, again, wasn't a position of need, I didn't think. A.J. Dillon, of course, being the running back from Boston College, who's, he was a solid player at BC, but I don't feel like that was a very good pick because of, again, not addressing a position of need. Aaron Jones balled out last year, proved his worth for the Packers, but they decided to go with another running back. There's clearly some. I mean, it does make your running back core much stronger, but overall, just wasn't really a choice many people were expecting. But this is not the end of the world. The Packers still have a pretty good roster. Their defense is still pretty good. They didn't have any questionable losses. They lost a couple of people, but nobody too bad. But that being said, I would expect regression with Green Bay. 13-3 was not a sustainable number. I would compare it with Chicago's year a couple years back, where they made it to the playoffs. They did lose in the first round to the Eagles of the dink from the Bears kicker that year. They had a really good defense. Their offense just was too inept. I don't think that the Packers' offense is inept, but I feel like a regression is inevitable in Green Bay. They just did not seem as good of a team as the record showed. I mean, really, they got their brakes beat off in Week 17 by a Lions team that was effectively tanking, and the Lions essentially let the brakes off, or let their foot off the gas in the last minutes of that game, so the Packers could take the lead and win the game, so they could get a better draft pick. That's what it felt like when I watched that game, at least. I just felt like there's no way a 13-3 team should get outplayed by a 3-win Lions team twice in one season, even though they won both of those games. It's hard to argue that they didn't get outplayed. But at the end of the day, Aaron Rodgers is still really good at football, and that's all they really need to be good. But if he does get hurt, even if you have Jordan Love, I don't think Jordan Love first year is good enough, will have good enough play to justify choosing a better record for Green Bay. So I do think they will regress. Just because Aaron Rodgers does kind of have a tendency to get hurt. Even though I don't think it'll happen, and I wouldn't wish injury on anybody. Just watch out. Pump the brakes on Green Bay a little bit. They're a team that is prime for regression. On to the Detroit Lions. I feel like this is a make or break year for both the GM and the head coach. And so far, they've done a really good job. I mean, with the draft assessing positions of need. They took Okudah, the cornerback out of Ohio State, in the first round. With the third overall pick, after murmurs of them trading back, they decided to just go with the third pick and take their guy. That's, of course, after losing Darius Slay. And they managed to nab what many consider to be the best running back in the draft in the second round, which is always a good thing if you can do that. I know a lot of people in hindsight consider Edwards-Helaire to be the best running back in the draft, taken by the Chiefs in the first round, but Swift was going in what many consider to be the number one running back in the draft. I saw a handful of people on social media confused as to why we would take Okudah after trading away Darius Slay, because Darius Slay was better, and why would we trade him away if we're just going to draft a cornerback anyway? And it's there's more in the league. There's more depth to decisions than just talent, and that one was definitely money. Darius Slay felt like he was declining, and on top of that, he wanted a big payday. Philadelphia was also desperate for a corner, so they got their guy. But paying a 30-year-old corner $19 million just didn't fit the bill for Detroit, and so they got rid of him, which, I mean, honestly, if I'm Detroit, Darius Slay is a great character. and he is really fun to watch, but he's not worth the payday he asked for. Um, I would say that something about Detroit was that they were competing with the best teams in the league before Stafford got hurt, and that team really lives and dies by Stafford. A lot of people will claim when talking about Stafford that he's, well, he doesn't have a playoff win, but really that's like a team stat. No matter how good a quarterback plays, if he just does not reach like the ultimate level, um, you know, you're not going to win a playoff game. Like, is Tim Tebow a better quarterback than Matthew Stafford because Tim Tebow has a playoff win? No. I think there would be very, very, very few people that would argue that. But I think Stafford is probably a top 7-8 quarterback in the NFL right now when he's healthy. He's a baller, and I mean he has carried Detroit to victory single-handedly many times throughout his career. There's a couple seasons back I remember that Detroit was basically getting a comeback every single game, and it was all in the back of Matthew Stafford. Also this year, I managed to catch the Lions-Chiefs game early on in the year, and I felt like the Lions genuinely outplayed the Chiefs, and also that Stafford kind of outplayed Mahomes. I feel like Stafford is as good a quarterback as you can expect in the NFL in the modern era. I just feel like the teams put around him and the coaching has always been suspect. But this team did get better everywhere. And I would even say if any team is going to be this year's San Francisco, look for Detroit. Kind of like a last to first type of thing. But ultimately they are unproven, and they could still be at the bottom of the division at the year's end if coaching doesn't improve, or if Stafford gets hurt again, because his back injuries have really been hindering him. Ultimately, this comes down to coaching, I feel like, for the Detroit Lions. If coaching doesn't improve, don't expect much out of Detroit here. New defensive coordinator Corey Undelin is also very unproven. He was the cornerbacks or secondary coach rather for Philadelphia in a very, very underwhelming Philadelphia Eagles secondary. However, that could just be accredited to lack of talent in Philadelphia. There was basically no cornerback talent outside of Bradley Roby, I believe. But that's not really saying much. I think that this team, I expect this team, I predicted a 9-8 record for this team. Could be a lot worse, could be a lot better. This is one of the more unpredictable teams, I feel like, but don't count them out. They'll probably do a little bit better than you expect them to. All right. Last team in the NFC North is the Chicago Bears. That is also where I predict them to come in this division, is last. Their major draft picks were Cole Kmet and Jalen Johnson, tight end out of Notre Dame and quarterback out of Utah. I do really like Jalen Johnson pick. I'm not really sold on picking Kmet, especially when tight end really wasn't a position of need for Chicago. And the Bears did have no first round picks this year because of the Khalil Mack trade and everything boiling over. The Bears have recently been a team that likes to trade out of the first round. A major acquisition this year by the Bears was Nick Foles from Jacksonville in a trade. This is like their do or die. The Bears picking up Nick Foles because of the Mitchell Trubisky project just not working at all. And I mean, taking a 1-year senior out of effectively a mid-tier college football team in North Carolina. I mean, they knew it was going to be a project quarterback, but they didn't really have the facilities to develop him good enough. And even still, I don't think he ever had the potential. Foles is an upgrade over Mitchell Trubisky for sure, but it's not as much as I feel like Bears fans want to think he is. He definitely played a couple of great games in Philadelphia. Obviously won the Super Bowl MVP in that good playoff run for the Philadelphia Eagles a couple years back. But that said, I don't feel like Foles is the savior that the Bears need. There were definitely some other quarterbacks that the Bears could have picked up that probably would have been better options, like Cam Newton. I feel like Cam Newton would have been a good pickup. Probably would have bowled out a little bit harder despite his like recent problems in Carolina. But I would have rated Cam Newton over Nick Foles. Nick Foles played really bad in Jacksonville. Got replaced by a 6th rounder and Gardner Minshew. I feel like a lot of Bears fans just think that the only reason he played bad was because you just wanted out and you needed a change of scenery. Like, Nick Foles is extremely inconsistent. He's proven that over his entire career. He had an amazing year back in 2011, I think it was. Had like this crazy touchdown interception rate, but then just went cold and didn't appear until he was back on the Eagles roster and won Super Bowl MVP. So he's definitely got some achievements under his belt, but don't expect Nick Foles to be even the 3rd best quarterback in this division. This is a very, very QB loaded division. And honestly, if Nick Foles is the 3rd best quarterback in this division by the end of the year, this team probably can make the playoffs. But I'm assuming he's not going to be because the other quarterbacks in this division are just too good. And that said, the Bears don't really have many offensive weapons for Nick Foles to work with. They have Tariq Cohen and David Montgomery, who are okay. Those are their running backs. But other than that, Allen Robinson is probably the only skill position player that I would say is good. Their offensive line is okay. Their receiving core outside of Allen Robinson is not very good. So this team will really have to get carried by its defense again if it wants to go deep. And I mean, the defensive line with Hicks and Mack will always be a force. And I think Eddie Jackson did a really good job last year proving himself as a Pro Bowl level safety. And I do think Jalen Jackson will be a great addition to this team and this defense. But unless the offense way overachieves expectations, I would personally predict the Bears to be in the cellar of the NFC North this year. And that just goes to show how talented the NFC North is this year. I feel like they're one of the best divisions in football. And the Bears aren't necessarily a bad team as much as they are just a victim of a really good football division. But that offense definitely needs to overachieve if they want to go anywhere. I look at this roster on offense and I don't see anything exciting enough to make me think that they might be a playoff team. If they get to the playoffs, it'd probably be a wild card. Unless again Nick Foles has one of his years, which personally I don't expect to happen. But you never know. You never know. It was definitely an interesting acquisition, and Nick Foles is definitely the best quarterback to come through Chicago since the start of the 2000s. But that doesn't really say much, considering the only real quarterbacks they've had are Mitchell Trubisky, Jay Cutler, and Rex Grossman. So don't expect much out of Chicago. They're probably going to be the under on most people's betting lines. If you're going to bet, probably go the under on their win total. Yeah, don't expect much out of Chicago. So at the end of the day, I do think the Vikings are the best team in review in this division. Expect the Bears and the Packers to regress. The Lions to probably improve a little bit, but not make a run at anything. And I think the only Super Bowl contender in this division is probably the Minnesota Vikings. So thanks for watching. The next episode, I will be covering the NFC East.